Okay, welcome everyone to this webinar on warmer homes and managing damp when renting privately. My name is Martin Nowitzka, I'm a project manager at SOCK, and one of the projects that I work on within my role is Home Civil Study. So Home Civil Study focuses on supporting students in reducing their exposure to energy poverty. From some research that we've done over the years, we know that many students have to limit the time they leave their heating on to save money on energy bills. It's quite common for students to feel comfortably cold in their accommodation, particularly when it's private rented, and that issues such as damp, mould and condensation are very common experiences in student housing. So this is research from us, from SOCK, called Home Civil Study, and I will be sharing a link to that and to some further resources in an email after the webinar's done. So in this session, which should take maximum 35 minutes unless there's plenty of questions, we'll look at what damp is, why it's a problem, and then we'll talk about how to manage damp and mould, whose responsibility is, things like that, and we'll end with some kind of more specific advice, top tips for a warmer home if you're a renter. So let's start with what is damp. So a definition of damp is quite a simple one. So damp basically refers to the presence of moisture or like water that's suspended in the air within a property. We know that around a third of students report experiencing damp or mould and condensation in their current accommodation in the private rented sector. So this is from a survey that we did earlier this year on student experiences in privately rented accommodation, and this is the stat that returned to us. So this is the accommodation that students are living in right now, not past experiences. This stat is better than it used to be, better than it was in previous years. So when we did some surveys 2017 and 14, but it is clearly still a significant issue. A third of people is still a lot of people. So there are three types of damp to look out for in your home. The first one is rising damp, and that's generally caused by failure in damp proofing of the floor, and it essentially means that moisture comes in from the ground and rises up into the property, into the walls. So a key sign, as you can see in the photo on the slide on the left hand side, is a damp mark that's rising from the floor or from the skirting board, and it usually looks like a tide mark, so kind of like a wave. Another type of damp is penetrating damp. So that's caused by water coming in from the outside, similarly to rising damp, but it's not coming in from the bottom. It's coming in from the sides or from the top. So it usually appears on ceilings or on walls. And key signs to spot that kind of damp would be blotchy damp patches or crumbly plaster that appears on the walls, and also kind of like damp stains anywhere kind of in ceiling corners. This kind of damp may cause drips and puddles if there is a lot of moisture in the wall in particular, and it's that kind of coming outside on the inside of the house. And then finally we have condensation, which is the most common type of damp, which most people tend to experience in their home, and that type of damp is caused by moist air that's coming in contact with cold surfaces. So hotspot areas for this are obviously windows, but also any external doors and mirrors, any surfaces that are really cold. So a key sign for condensation damp is if you have water droplets forming. They're usually kind of next to the seals, next to the in like the corners of windows, on the glass, and sometimes if there's a lot of them, you could see larger pools of water either on the window frame or going down to the windowsill. Also, if the windows feel cold and damp to the touch, then that's a very clear symptom of dampness in the home. If the damp problem is left for a prolonged period of time, any of these three, then the walls or the frames that are being affected by it might also start to develop fungal growth. And there's one more general side of damp, that kind of covers all three of these is a musty smell in the air. So for example, if you have a damp basement that's not insulated from the rest of the house, then the smell from the basement will rise up to the room above it as well. So it could be, basically a smell could mean that there is a damp problem either in the room or potentially in the room below it, or in the basement below the room where you can smell that. So why is damp a problem? First of all, let's do a quick physics recap. So air naturally contains moisture, so water suspended in the air, and water, from a physics perspective, is difficult to heat. So the more humid the air is in the house, in the room, the more energy it takes to warm it up. So essentially, it means that you're not just heating up the air, you're also heating up the water that's suspended in the air. So the more water there is, the more energy will be needed to heat that room up. And of course, that means that it will be more expensive. So there is a limit to wanting to exclude humidity, because it is necessary for comfort. So humid air holds heat more efficiently than dry air. So once it's heated up, it kind of holds on to that heat. During the winter, an appropriate amount of humidity can also make your home more comfortable and reduce the need for your furnace to continually replenish indoor heat. Now, it is unlikely that you'll have very low humidity in your housing, as the UK housing stock is generally kind of old and leaky. But just a note for those of you who may be living in well-insulated new builds, we should be aiming for between 30 to 60% humidity during cooler months of the year in our homes. Any less than that, and you're potentially risking dry skin and nasal passages, and that can lead to some potential respiratory illnesses. It's way more likely that you'll be at the higher end of the range, or above this range, and that, on the other hand, is risk for mold developing, and it also encourages dust mites. So house dust mite allergy is very, very common, and it's associated with asthma, eczema, and also perennial allergic rhinitis. Another reason damp is a problem is because it can have a negative effect on your health. So both physical and mental health and comfort. It can increase any of the respiratory problems that tenants might already have, or it can contribute to developing such issues. And this can be particularly harmful to young children and the elderly, but also anyone who tends to be immunocompromised, for example. Damp also makes the house more prone to mould, which is a fungus that can trigger or exacerbate various health issues. So things like difficulty breathing, irritation, allergic reactions, skin rashes, and asthma attacks. And the Housing Health and Safety rating dictates that damp is an essential repair for landlords and for people who rent out properties, as it can cause health issues for tenants. And the final reason for why damp is an issue is because it can cause damage to the building and belongings. So it can damage the structure of the property, particularly kind of walls around windows, those kinds of areas. Any furniture that's close to where walls or windows have damp issues, but also to your belongings. So that includes bedding, clothes, books, any carpets, towels, kind of anything that's soft, that can encourage moisture to be retained in there and develop mold in kind of like closed space. So let's go into managing damp and mold, and let's first talk about who was responsible. And unfortunately, there isn't a straightforward answer because it just depends. So rising or penetrating damp is always caused by structural issues with the property. So this can be things like lack of or damage to a damp-proof course within the structure of the home, cavity wall insulation that's been incorrectly installed, any cracks in the walls that appear, any damaged gutters or downpipes or roofs, any internal leaks from piping in the bathroom or in the kitchen, or if you have like a washing machine that's incorrectly set up. Anything like that is the responsibility of the landlord to sort that. Condensation is a bit more tricky. So again, if caused by lack of repairs, if it starts appearing because there are structural issues of the landlord, or the landlord's like refusing to to fix your heating if it's broken or something like that, or if the building is poorly insulated, or the ventilation system is faulty, or also if condensation is a major problem. So if you see mold forming and you can't manage to sort it out, then it is also considered a structural issue, because it's a clear sign that moisture can't escape from the property. So under Section 11 of the Landlord and Tenant Act from 1985, it is the landlord's responsibility to resolve mold issues that are caused by structural faults. So if that's the cause of the condensation, if lack of repairs, so for example, as I've mentioned, the heating or ventilation system is a reason for condensation, or any damage has been caused already because the repairs have not been made. So damage could be like rotten window frames or any damaged plasterwork, or it makes your home unfit to live in, then your landlord is responsible for sorting out the condensation problem. Just a quick note on what it means that the home is unfit to live in. A rented home is unfit to live in when the conditions in the home or safety issues are so bad that it's not reasonable for you to live there. So if you feel like whoever is renting your home to you wouldn't live in it because it's not comfortable, because for example it affects your health seriously, it puts you at risk of physical harm or injury, or it means that you can't make full use of your home. So for example, if there's a room or two that have a really big damp or mold problem, and it basically means that they're unusable, that means that the home is unfit to live in, and that according to the law is the responsibility of the landlord to sort it out. If you have a specific clause in your rental agreement that landlord is responsible for sorting any and all damp issues, then they are responsible, because that is something that you've signed. If that's not the case, so it's not written anywhere, it's not because of structural problems or lack of repairs, then you are the person who is responsible to sort in the condensation issues. So we'll talk about that in a second. But first, if it is your landlord who's responsible for fixing your damp or your mold problems, you need to get in touch with them. So if you spot mold anywhere within your rental property as a tenant, you need to let your landlord know as soon as possible. So make sure that you describe what it looks like, where it is, how big it is, ideally attach photos, and also describe any impact on your health that's had and any damage that's been caused by it. There is a template letter that we have available on our website for you to write an email like this to make it a bit easier. And then once the problem has been reported, the landlord has to respond within 14 days. So that's an example of how to report things. And again, if you have issues that are because of structural problems with your property, then again, also report it. So as an example here, we have condensation between the windows pane of your double or triple glazed windows. If you see condensation appearing basically inside your window, that means that the seal of the window has failed and the condensation has become trapped in it. The only way to solve this problem is by replacing the glass, and obviously that is not your responsibility, that is on the landlord. If this kind of condensation is left untreated, it can eventually penetrate into the wall below if there's a lot of it accumulating, and that can lead to various problems. So mold or even wet or dry rot that causes serious damage to the structure of the property. If your landlord refuses to make repairs that mean that you just have that damp issue constantly there, please do not withhold rent. That can be risky. You could be risking eviction. Technically, you do not have the right to do this, even if your landlord is not sorting your problems and not responding to your emails. So never withhold rent, because that is illegal and we don't want anyone ending up being thrown out of their home. But tenants do have the right to make the repairs themselves and make up the cost in future rent if the landlord's not doing this. If you decide to go down this route, you need to be absolutely certain that the repairs that are needed are the responsibility of the landlord and not you. So make sure to seek legal advice before doing this and follow the correct procedures. Worth knowing and remembering that unfortunately there are risks with doing it, because some private landlords might still take steps to evict you if you try to do this, even though it is within your right. There is a complex process that you must follow. You will be responsible for the quality of the work, but you can't do it yourself, so there has to be a contractor involved there. So just make note of that. Shelter and Citizens Advice have very, very good advice in terms of how to organise repairs, and some legal advice around organising repairs if your landlord isn't going to do that. And again, I'll include that in the further resources. But ideally, we would like to see the landlord fixing everything as and when you report it. Okay, so that's on what if the landlord's responsibility stands with them, basically. But what if the responsibility is on you? How do you manage condensation damp issues? So I just wanted to note that condensation is very common, both in rented houses, but also in owner-occupier houses, because everyday activities release moisture into the air. So as you can see on the slide in the table, cooking can mean that up to 3 litres end up in the air. If you wash the dishes, up to 1 litre. If you have pot plants, they will also release moisture into the air. So even if you don't do any cooking, any washing, don't shower, don't wash the dishes, don't have any plants, you just have you living in the house, even that releases moisture into the air both during the day and at night. So what can you do to minimize condensation coming from those sources? The best thing you can do is always prevent. So we have a list of 4 don'ts here. So the first one is don't use portable gas or paraffin heaters. These put a lot of moisture into the air, so you should try to avoid using them if you can. It's best to dry clothes outside or in a room with the door closed and the window open, or a dehumidifier on, or a fan on if you're using the bathroom, not drying your clothes directly on radiators. Because when you do that, first of all, you block your radiator from circulating the heat. And second of all of the moisture is going back into the air and staying in the air if the window in the room is closed. Another thing to do is don't block ventilation. So if you have air vents, don't cover them, don't close ventilators, and don't disable or switch off the fans if they're supposed to be working. And finally, don't push furniture tightly against external walls, or ideally any walls. So you should make sure that you leave a small gap between the walls of your home and the furniture, because this allows the air to move away from the bottom of the wall and circulate around the room. If air lingers between the furniture and walls for too long, it will condense onto walls and could eventually form into black mould. So that was our list of don'ts. Now our list of do's. So some things that you should be doing to prevent condensation damp is putting lids on your pots and your pans when you're cooking. So even if the water or your meal is not yet boiling, moisture is being released into the air. So make sure that you use the lids that your pots and pans come with. This also means that your food will cook quicker because it will retain the temperature inside the pot or the pan. When you cook or when you shower, make sure that you put extractor fans on or open windows. And at the same time, close any internal doors to kitchen or bathrooms when you're cooking or showering. So we want to be opening the window and closing the door so that any extra moisture that gets released into the air stays within that small area and doesn't dissipate into the rest of the house, because then it'll be more difficult to air it out. As I've already mentioned, if you can, dry your clothes outdoors, and make sure that you air the rooms out, ideally daily, and that's particularly for bedroom windows. This doesn't mean that you need to have windows open for ages. 5, maximum 10 minutes, kind of when you get up first thing in the morning, quickly air it out, and then you can close your windows, have your heating on, and be nice and toasty in your home. This is particularly important for the bedrooms because a lot of moisture ends up in the air after a night of sleeping. The next one is to try and have a constant temperature in your home. That's ideally at least 15 degrees if you can. This is because it is cold air that causes the warm air to release moisture. So if all of the air is the same temperature, then this cannot happen in the home. And then a final note on this slide is to make sure that you air out your cupboards and your wardrobes regularly, as well as your room, to not have any pesky mold spores sitting in your clothing or in anything that's really tightly packed. If you already have condensation in your home and you can't see it, and you're already doing prevention and it still keeps appearing, there are ways to manage it. So first of all is wipe it down when it appears, particularly in the mornings or after showering or cooking, and that it's usually most visible on the windows after that happens. So use a towel, tissues, or a squeegee for any windows that open, so it doesn't cause damage or develop into mold. There are also window vacuum cleaners if you're more into kind of techie solutions. They're also an option. So either wipe it down or you can catch it. So you could install foam or sponge drip strips on your window frames, or you could put up condensation absorbing window stickers, and they also have various kind of designs. So you could, I suppose, add to any decoration in your room. Just make sure when you wipe it down or catch it with something that's fabric, make sure to wring it out rather than dry it on a radiator, because again, drying it on a radiator would simply put the moisture back into the air. Any plants that you have indoors, as we've mentioned, will naturally release moisture into the air. So if you have several houseplants by your windows, try moving some of them away to reduce the concentration of moisture that they release nearby that window. And just a very quick note on exterior condensation on your windows, so condensation that's gathered on the outside of your windows. It's a very normal, natural meteorological phenomenon. It doesn't mean your windows are in any way defective, and with any kind of sunshine or warmer weather spurts, it will evaporate off the glass. It doesn't affect your windows in any way. It's not a damp issue for your home, so just don't worry about it. Condensation issues that we're talking about condensation on the inside of your window. So when you touch your window, if you can feel the condensation and the water there. So that's managing condensation. And then if you already have issues with mold in your home, there are also ways that you can manage that but only try and remove it yourself if you know that it's caused by condensation and covers an area that's less than 1 square meter. Once you deal with the cause of the damp list and remove the mold that you already have, it should not reappear, hopefully. But yeah, only do it when you know it's condensation caused. Do not try to remove it at all if it's caused by any sewage or other contaminated water, or if it's very, very big. A contractor, someone qualified, should be tackling that if it's a big problem. But if it's small enough for you to deal with it yourself, first thing first, make sure that you protect yourself, at the very least with rubber gloves. If possible, ideally wear goggles and a mask that also covers your nose and mouth, just to keep it safe from any of the chemicals that you'll be using, and also from any of the mold spores. The room that you're treating should be kind of similar, like a kitchen or bathroom when you're cooking or showering in it. So open the windows and close the door, so that any of the smells are going to the outside and not to the inside of the home. If you have any issues with mold on kind of soft furnishings, so clothes or carpets, make sure they get them professionally dry cleaned. If they're affected, do not try and sort them out yourselves. A professional should be dealing with that. And you can pack them in a plastic bag to avoid spreading spores in the other rooms in your house. So after all of that, all of those disclaimers, you come to the wall, you come to the window that has a bit of a mold issue. Bring a bucket that's filled with water and either a bit of bleach, some specialist mold removal liquid, or some mild detergent, so something like a washing up liquid. Use a rag and wipe it off the wall carefully. Do not brush it or try to vacuum anything, as this can release mold spores, so we don't want it. We don't want the problem spreading any further than where it reappears. And when you're done wiping it off, make sure that you dry the wall completely using a dry rag or dry tissues, because we don't want the mold reappearing, because we're keeping the wall a bit damp. Remember that the only lasting way of avoiding the return of severe mould or any mould is to eliminate dampness. So eliminate dampness from your home and make sure that that you take that moisture off if it ever does appear in the form of condensation. And finally, some no and low cost advice for a warmer home. So our top heating tips are to set your thermostat to a desired temperature in your home. That's best kind of between 18 and 21 degrees. That's the ideal temperature for most people to have in their home. Just remember that if you turn the thermostat up in your home, that won't mean that your home will heat up faster. It will just keep heating up to a higher temperature, which will be more expensive. But at the same time, make sure that you only have the heating on when you actually need it. So if there's no one in the house or everyone is sleeping, it doesn't make sense to run the heating because it is just a waste of money if there's no one there to use it. So avoid having it on if no one's using it. Also, it's better to sleep in a room that's kind of 16 to 18 degrees at night. It's a temperature that will feel a bit cold during the day, but it's actually a great temperature for a good healthy night's sleep. So kind of preparing for that in the evening rather than keeping the heating on until the second you're in the bed would be better for you. Make sure that there's nothing that's blocking your radiator, so no furniture or no washing drying directly on the radiator or right next to the radiator, because it basically means that the air that's being heated by your radiator will be trapped in that little gap between that and either the sofa or any other furniture or the washing that you have right in front of it, and it will prevent it from circling around the room and heating the rest of the room up. Make sure they harness the heat of the sun when it graces us with its presence and comes out from the clouds. So open the curtains during the day to let the sun in and let it warm the rooms up very slightly through the windows. And also use the residual heat after cooking. So especially if you're cooking with the oven, make sure that you keep it open, maybe not wide open, but just like kind of like cracked after you've finished cooking, so that any heat that's left over after you're done making your meal dissipates around the house rather than kind of stays trapped and cools down within the oven. And some tips for draft proofing your home. First of all, make sure that you ask your landlord or your agency to reseal any broken sealant around the doors and windows. You can also request installation of kind of draft proofing measures, so strips or door sweeps, any keyhole covers, or a draft excluder to the letterbox. And if you have any doors to the outside that have like a big gap at the bottom, you could put a draft snake or substitute that with rolled up blankets or towels to close that off. The reason we want to draft proof our home as much as possible is because drafts can bring in moisture from the outside. So for example, when it's really foggy, and that will make the heating harder. Also the heat will escape through the gaps, and any air kind of moving around the room will also feel colder than still air. So try to make sure that that your house is as tight, as kind of draft proof as possible. So that's kind of general rules, and then some additional insulation solutions, I suppose, but kind of more internal rather than looking at the structure of your home. If you have rooms in your home that you're not heating, that you're not using and not heating, or anywhere where you have the window open, so for example a bathroom after showering, close doors to those rooms. First of all, to make sure that it is being ventilated, the moisture's not getting into the rest of the house if that's what you're doing. But also if for some reason you forget to close the window, then that door will make sure that the rest of the house stays warm, and it's just that one room that's potentially getting colder because of that open window unnecessarily. Heat rises, so generally rooms on the first or top floor are warmer than downstairs bedrooms. So to keep the heat downstairs, close the doors from the downstairs rooms that are leading into the hallway or the staircase. You can also hang blankets over exterior doors, so kind of install a pole and have a curtain on it or a blanket on it, or to close off the staircase to try and prevent the heating rising up and escaping your downstairs. And I've mentioned opening the curtains to harness the sun, but also make sure that you close them at dusk to create an additional layer of insulating air between the windows and the inside of your home. So anything that kind of seeps through, any cold that seeps through to the other side of the window can be stopped by your curtain. Just make sure that there are no gaps in it. Some further advice from us. So we have a webinar from last year that goes into a lot more detail and a lot more tips than the ones I've just spoken about in the past 2 slides, called How to Keep Warm in Winter. We recently also did a webinar on energy bills more generally, and kind of looking at advice around energy bills and tackling your energy bills and making them smaller without affecting your comfort. That's not just looking at heating, but kind of general activities around the home. We also have various advice guides available on our website, including template letter that I've already mentioned that you can use to report any issues to your landlord. And we have a specific guide on damp, condensation and mould as well, if you'd like to have a look at some of the contents of this webinar in a written form. So I'll be sending links to that as well with any information at the end. And we have one more webinar that's coming up this semester on the 8th of December at 12 again, and it'll be focused on house hunting for a warm home. So we'll be looking at basically what to look for when you're looking for a new home to make sure that it's a warm one, there's no issues of damp, and your energy bills are not too high. If there are any questions, I am happy to take them. And you're also always welcome to email me at the end in response to my roundup email. I don't think there are any, but if anything comes up, please feel free to get in touch. Thank you very much for joining, and if you'd like to get in touch with us about this webinar or about any of our other work, this is how you can do so. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a lovely day, and I hope what you've learned here today will be helpful for you.